Oh, thanks very much, Minister. Perry Williams, Chief Business Correspondent of The Australian, and delighted to say we had 10 minutes. I extended it to 15 minutes because we've got a bit to cover today. Okay. So, look, I want to get on to food and agriculture, of course. That's what everyone wants to hear about. But let's start on steel and aluminium tariffs. I just want to work through exactly what happened. The PM obviously requested another call with Trump. That never eventuated. Should you or the PM have got on a plane and gone over to Washington?
Look, I think let's go back to how this all started. On the day that President Trump announced that he was going to implement tariffs on steel and aluminium, our Prime Minister Albanese, had a discussion with him. In that discussion, the President, unlike every other country, because of course in his announcement the President said there will be no exemptions for any country. I was talking with Mr. Lutnick this morning. He said there'd been 426 exemptions to the last time that the tariffs were increased. So President Trump says no tariffs. He says to the Australian Prime Minister, but we'll give consideration to Australia. Australia was the only country that consideration was given to. As a result of that discussion, we embarked upon a course of action that included 3, perhaps 4 meetings with Mr. Lutnick, and the last meeting with Mr. Lutnick and Mr. Greer. We wanted to get an exemption. We put all of the arguments in favour of Australia getting an exemption, but at the end of the day, we were not successful. But I think the important thing here is no other country was successful, Perry, and it didn't matter whether you had a face-to-face meeting with the President, whether there were more meetings between trade ministers and the Commerce Secretary, or whether there was more discussions with the ambassadors. I think, to be honest with you, the decision was already made that no country was going to get an exemption from those steel and aluminium tariffs. I read overnight the European Trade Minister's comments. He went to America, he met with the Commerce Secretary. He said it was a waste of time. Now, I don't think it is a waste of time, and we're going to continue the discussions over the weekend into next week, because we've actually got a more important challenge now, because, as I said in my speech, steel and aluminium only represent 0.2% of our exports. And I think it's important to understand that when we got an exemption last time, so did Argentina, so did Brazil, so did a whole lot of other countries which we compete with. Okay, our steel now costs, our aluminium now costs 25% more than it did before, but so did theirs, so does theirs. So the playing field hasn't actually changed. What has changed is the costs have gone up for the Americans. It's simply more expensive now for them to buy overseas steel and aluminium. And as much as they would like to think that suddenly the problem is solved, it takes years to build new aluminium production centres, and same with steel mills. So my own view about this, and I'm not downplaying the seriousness of the issues, and I'm not downplaying the efforts that we put in to try to stop this. The reality is that we will continue to sell our steel and sell our aluminium into the United States. It's just going to cost them more, so inflation goes up, and a whole lot of other adverse consequences. Can I distinguish what's happened here with steel and aluminium with what happened with, let's say, wine in the China situation? China imposed a 220% tariff on Australian wine. That decision killed our industry stone dead the next day. We went from $1.2 billion worth of wine sales to zero wine sales. That's not what happened here. We'll continue to sell steel. It's just going to be more expensive for the Americans.
What was the nature of your discussion with Mr. Lutnick this morning?
Well, look, we talked about the future, and we talked about the next steps. My view is we shouldn't panic. This has obviously been a bad decision, and the Prime Minister has come out and criticised the decision, and we will continue to prosecute our argument that this is the wrong direction. It's obviously the wrong direction for Australia because we are a free and fair trading nation, but it's also the wrong direction for the United States. I mean, why is the United States the greatest economy in the world? Well, it's because they've had free trade. Since post-war, they've had that free trading, and what's built up that great economy has been the free trade. They're actually going in the wrong direction, and part of my job, as difficult it's going to be, will be to convince them that this is not the right way to go, that the path to prosperity, both for Australia and the United States, is free and fair trade.
Did you discuss, obviously there's a lot of focus on the so-called reciprocal tariffs, which could come into effect on April the 2nd, or at least an announcement then. Did you discuss that this morning?
We'll be talking through all of those issues in the days and the weeks ahead.
And obviously, especially for this audience, how worried are you, the beef industry, for instance, exports to the US, dwarfs our steel and aluminium.
Yeah,
so how concerned are you about that?
No, well, deeply concerned because if you take what has been said by President Trump and the Americans, they are looking at this reciprocal tariff arrangement. Now, we would say, look, if you looked at a reciprocal arrangement, we charge no tariff on American products coming into Australia, and they don't charge us any tariffs on those products, agricultural products, going into the United States. I think it's important to understand the relationship, the trading relationship. Our trade with China, $327 billion. Our trade with the United States, $100 billion. Our trade with China, $230 billion is what we sell to them. $100 billion is what we buy from them. So $130 billion in our favour. United States, quite a different proposition. Of that $100 million, $70 billion is what we buy from the United States. $30 billion is what we sell. So our argument, and this was the argument that Prime Minister Turnbull used, was that there's a trade deficit with Australia as far as we're concerned. So yes, we've got to prosecute this argument. If we look at the beef, and I think it might have been David who told me this, most of the beef that we sell to the United States goes into McDonald's hamburgers. Mr. Trump's favourite food, I'm told. But if you apply a 10 or a 25% tariff to Australian beef going into the United States, the only thing you do is push up the price in the United States of that product. Now, that, creates inflation in the United States. It means Americans are paying more for their food, not less. So we say that's a counterproductive method. But of course, it has an impact in Australia on those producers and affects jobs. So on Tuesday night, I spoke with my Korean counterpart. They'd also gone to the United States. They'd had no success in getting any exemptions. What they want to do is talk about greater two-way trade between Australia and Korea.
Yes.
And it's diversification. We've talked about the United Arab Emirates. If we can get our beef and our lamb into the United Arab Emirates tariff-free, then we've got an advantage ahead of all other producers. So, let's look at India. our trade with India is now up agricultural trade, up 138% since our new free trade agreement. Our beef exports to the United Kingdom are up 500% from where we were before we had a trade agreement. In fact, when I was asking for greater access with the Europeans for beef and lamb, they said to me, look, we're not going to give you any more access because you've stolen our market in the United Kingdom.
Minister, just going back to that, I guess, negotiation between the two, obviously critical minerals, we've written about in the Australian today, how that could be a bargaining chip of sorts.
Very wise story, that one.
Yeah, look, that's already been rejected by the administration. Why are we sort of going back, for a second attempt there?
Because we don't give up. We could have easily, there were plenty of times in the last 3 years when we didn't look like we were making progress with the Chinese, and we could have thrown up our hands and said, look, we're wasting our time. Our arguments are not having any impact, and we're not going to get the removal of these tariffs. But we didn't give up. Look, we shouldn't panic in this situation. This was a bad result. There's no getting away from that. But, my job and the job of any person in this role is to keep talking. And I guess the difference between what's happening now and what happened at the initial stages of China, you might recall, Mr. Birmingham couldn't get to talk to his counterpart. Well, we're continuing to talk with our counterparts. We might not be there right in front of them, but these days, people are used to video calls, and Mr. Lutnick said he was quite happy for us to have video calls. We've got to keep talking to them. My mum used to say, every problem has a solution. Well, we've just got to find what the solution is here.
And just to be clear, are you seeking an exemption to those April 2 reciprocal tariffs?
We're seeking the application of our free trade agreement with the United States, and the application of that free trade agreement means we don't charge tariffs on them and they don't charge tariffs on us.
You've got another phone call scheduled on Sunday, I believe, with Jamison Greer.
I think that's now changed to, he's requested this morning that we do it on Monday, their time.
Well, if you can keep us posted.
Okay, yeah. I will.
Great. But look, is there anything specific you're looking for in that conversation?
Look, my job is to project the best way I can the position of the Australian government and the Australian people. That's the job I've set myself. Will it be successful? Well, the point's been made that Trump Mark II is not the same as Trump Mark I, so it's a more difficult conversation. But if we give up and say, look, these what do they say? Only death and taxes are inevitable, not tariffs. So my job is to keep pushing at every opportunity I get to connect with my equivalents. It's not entirely clear what the relationship between Mr. Greer and Mr. Lutnick is. Under the former government, the Biden government, you had Gina Raimondo as Commerce Secretary and Catherine Tai working independently. There was a suggestion at the start of the Trump administration that Mr. Lutnick will have a greater role in this trade space. But whoever it is, whether it's Mr. Greer or Mr. Lutnick, we'll keep talking with them.
Trump Mark II obviously is a different beast. Are you worried about a bombshell dropping in the election campaign, either from Trump or potentially China?
Well, I never predict what might happen with bombshells in the election. I just hope they don't fall on me.
Indeed. And look, just in terms of diversification, obviously our strategy in Asia is impressive and sort of unrivaled, but aren't we sort of, slightly missing the point with China? I mean, triple what we export to the US, but, at the click of a finger, they can also, put an end to that, as we saw a few years ago. I mean, how stable is that trading relationship?
Look, I've had now 9 meetings with my Chinese counterpart. It started with a phone call, then a video conference, and now a series of meetings where he comes to Australia. He's kind enough to come to Adelaide, and I've gone to his hometown of Shanghai. In November, I went up to Shanghai to the world's largest trade meeting. I took 253 Australian companies, particularly food and wine manufacturers. He met with one minister out of all the ministers that were there, and he gave me an hour on a Sunday night ahead of his busiest week. We've established a good, stable relationship. Look, I can't predict, what might happen into the future. All I can do is represent Australia as best I can with all of these countries and put our arguments as strongly as I can. And so far, certainly with the Chinese, United Arab Emirates, India, the Indian Trade Minister came out to my vineyard. I'm told he went back to India singing the praises of Australian wine. Not just my wine, everybody's wine. Look, this is all about relationships. You've got to build those relationships. You've got to trust your judgment. You've got to make value judgments about the people that you're dealing with. And you've got to work out the arguments that are going to best work to represent Australia's interests, and that's what I try and do.
Excellent. Well, look, we are out of time, but on that hopeful note, thank you very much, Senator Farrell, for your time. Please join me in thanking the Minister.
Thank you.